So belatedly welcome to the 8th discussion, second last. I sent round a handout. The camera is not working. Is the camera working?
No.
Oh, you mean your camera is not working. Okay, understand. Okay.
Sorry, yes, my camera.
No, I am
Thank you,
unable to
sorry.
read, chat, and open my mouth and produce articulate speech at the same time. So the plan is, as per the handout, is try and understand what Socrates is saying overall and in some of the details of his arguments, just to fully understand it as much as possible. Next week we can, apply harsh interpretive judgments and broader interpretive remarks. But yeah, today I want to try and make it as easy as possible to understand what's going on as a whole. So, and while I open documents and whatnot, if anyone has any questions or comments regarding anything in the past, feel free to bring them up. Okay, is that a readable? Okay, yes. So very, very broadly, as I mentioned last week, there's the prelude to Socrates' speech where he appears to be adapting what Agathon has done, which is to talk about how he's going to discuss things and then discuss things. And so Socrates has his prelude by discussing what a praise is. And I'm going to read this quote that I selected because it's characteristic of the speech, and we have to understand that speech in the light of it. He says, "In my foolishness, I suppose that we must say true things about anything that is being praised. Being praised is receiving an encomium." People used to praise things a lot more before they became entirely nihilistic. If there is nothing and there's nothing any good, then there's nothing to praise. That's why we don't have heroes, we don't have paradigms, and that's why we have, you always have centers for what you lack. We have centers for the promotion of excellence and this and that because we don't have excellence. We have centers for the promotion of resilience because we lack all resilience. You can always spot what you lack because the government is sponsoring centers for the promotion of X and telling lies about our possession of it. So, but if you don't have anything that you think is actually excellent, then things aren't worthy of praise. And then your literature tends to be, look at my open wound. It's not, look at this beautiful thing. It's not, look at this gorgeous cosmos or tragic cosmos in which this human nobility occurs. Those are older modes of praise, which we lack entirely. And that's why it's very hard to understand even this language, like why would you praise something? All praise is false, we know that, it's just advertising, and so on and so forth. But I just say that just to try and explain why there is a particular weight to an encomium or a praise in this different epoch when they weren't nihilistic. Okay, so he thought we must say true things about what is being praised, and on that beginning, pick out from these very things, the true things, the most beautiful or noble, and arrange them as fittingly as possible. Now that means he's going to abstract from the ugly or the ignoble in this speech. Okay. And we need to be aware of that. And I'll make a suggestion later about where part of that missing gap is. But yeah, you might have your own thoughts. Okay, so that's the first part, is how to give a praise. And then he discusses with Agathon whether or not Eros is a god or a passion. And yeah, so I suggested in Agathon's speech, there is a conflation of the two. He piles up these attributes. He gives you the qualities that the god Eros possesses, and then discusses his gifts. And the gifts are, he inspires people to want to be famous and therefore produce the arts and sciences that make comfortable life possible, civilized, peaceful life. But that leaves this tension. Is Eros a being, a separate being, a god, or a passion? And that is resolved in that dialogue with Agathon, where he has him admit that eros is nothing but a passion relative to the beautiful, and he gets him to admit that the good things are also beautiful, and so therefore it is a passion for the beautiful and good, and therefore, and which one lacks, and so therefore eros is not himself a god, because gods don't lack beauty and goodness. But that would apply to all the other gods as well. He doesn't draw that implication, obviously. Okay, so that's the discussion with Agathon, which we looked at. And then we come to Socrates' speech proper, which he turns into a dialogue with Diotima, who, and I quote here at the beginning of this part 3, the dialogue with Diotima. So this is 11 Stephanus pages, so probably 15 or something in the English. And that's fairly extensive. So we'll have this rough overview, which I've articulated in the following page and a half, and then we'll start to read some passages. Okay, so he describes Diotima as someone who is wise in many other things, and once, upon the Athenians sacrificing, she put the plague off for 10 years. So either she said, if you don't want this plague for 10 years, sacrifice, or they sacrificed, and I have a sneaking suspicion that she benefits from the sacrifice, and then she put the plague off. But it could be either way. It could be that she advises and this is the regular thing. You go to the prophet or the prophetess, and they say, sacrifice so and so many cows, and your disease will be put off, or your war will be won, or your trip will be successful. Now, as I mentioned, it was disastrous that the plague occurred in 430 and not 440 BC. Because in 430 BC, the Athenians were all crowded into the city, more people got sick, and they lost Pericles, their most intelligent statesman of the time. Whereas if it had been 10 years before, a lot fewer people would have died, and they weren't in a war to the death with Sparta. So that makes her an ambiguous prophetess. Okay, and there are other signs that we're meant to read what she teaches Socrates with caution. At one point he calls her a perfect sophist. That means she's giving a discussion as if she is wise, even as she's the one who provides the discussion of the philosopher as the one who insists that they are not wise, and that the most difficult thing is people who think they're wise. So there are these various qualifications that he gives to her. Okay, now he says at 201 D to E that we must go through who Eros is and what qualities he has, and then his works. That's virtually a replication of what Agathon said. And that also means that Eros sounds like he's a god with various qualities and works. So that has to be worked through again. Okay. Now, his speech also has 3 parts. The first is when Diotima explains to him that Eros is something in between. Because he says, okay, so if Eros is not beautiful or noble and not good, because Eros is for those things, Eros is related to and directed towards what is noble and beautiful and good, in that case, Eros lacks those things, and he says, so Eros is bad and ugly. And she says, does everything have to be binary, right? In some areas, it does. I disappoint the current generation. In some areas, it does. But she says in some places, it is not. So Eros is an in-between. That's the first section, and we'll come back to that, and we'll read some passages. Then the second section, after he's convinced that, yes, okay, Eros is something in between, and it's an in-between of a particular quality that combines both of the extremes. Right. Now, he says, fine, then what use does Eros have for human beings? And that brings us directly back to Phaedrus' speech. And that's just one of about 30 direct quotes from the other speeches, because he's trying to comprehend all of their observations about the experience of Eros, or the benefits of Eros, into his presumably more comprehensive view. So this whole second part is what use does Eros have for human beings? And that leads immediately into, well, what does it mean for something to be useful or good? And that opens up this discussion of the relation between the good on the one hand and the beautiful or noble on the other. And that's the most important point of the speech, and it's quite complex, and we'll come back to that and discuss. That's the second part. Third part is when Diotima, asks Socrates, what do you suppose is the cause of eros, of the eros and desire for the beautiful or the good? And the cause of it, in this discussion, is the desire for the mortal being to participate in that which is deathless, whether through generation of children, through fame, or through the mind, through the temporary participation of the mind in the atemporal, intelligible structure of things. So those are the three, and that's the last, which is the participation of the mind in the unchanging principles of things. That's the final part of the speech and the peak of it. Right. So we'll go back to the beginning of his discussion with her, and I'll bring up the text and we can start to read a few passages. But any questions thus far, and
I'm just suddenly stuck on the plague issue. I mean, what does it even mean to postpone a plague for 10 years? Okay.
How is that useful?
No, just, I mean, it's obviously after the 10 years when the plague is hit that they realise that she postponed it. Or
sorry, they realise
that you can even talk about it being postponed.
Yes.
Because she didn't make it go away. It turned up, and what's the claim? What is the claim exactly? That she says, well, you would have got the disease 10 years earlier.
Well, that maybe a few people started dying, and they said, how can we stop this plague? And she said, if you sacrifice the appropriate number of hecatombs to Artemis or whatever, then I'll stop it. And they did the appropriate sacrifice, and it stopped.
For 10 years?
Yes, for 10 years.
Yeah.
Okay, so again, just in summary, so Socrates' speech in the third part, the dialogue with Diotima, has three parts. Which is more or less what is eros, and in between, what use is eros? That is, what relation does it have to the human good? And then what's the cause of it? And we're starting with the latter part of the discussion of what he is, and in between. And I just want to read a passage at, where is it? (204), I think 204b. 204a, actually. So she's gone through this complicated story about the genesis of eros as being born from penia and poros, from poverty and resource. I don't know how's that translated here. Yeah, resource, son of cunning. So she tells that story, and then at 204a, well, she's just said that by being in between, he's continually coming to life, passing away, flourishing at one moment, and so on. And moreover, he's in the middle between wisdom and ignorance. Now, this is an explication of what being in the middle means. She's already said that everything daimonic binds together the whole with itself, which means it's in contact with everything that is in the whole. Right? So if to be between wisdom and ignorance means to possess both. Now, what is that? Am I sharing? Are you seeing this dialogue? Okay.
Make it bigger though.
Okay. Now then, so to be in between wisdom and ignorance, and this is kind of the point of his whole speech, is to try and get us to admit there are certain experiences that we can't deny that imply the intelligibility of, for example, beauty or nobility. But we also don't know sufficiently what that is. And he'll say at 205b that eros is deceptive. That is, what we ordinarily take ourselves to want is not what we really want. And this is what he's trying to teach us. He's trying to teach us that we already do experience what we don't fully recognize, and the only proper response to that is to think, is to philosophize. And at 204a, Plato has Socrates make Diotima say the following: "No god philosophizes or desires to become wise, for he is so already. Nor if anyone else is wise does he philosophize. And the ignorant in their turn don't philosophize or desire to become wise. This is what makes ignorance so hard to bear. It's because someone who isn't beautiful and good, so that's implying that someone who is beautiful and good is not, because that's a commonplace, kalos kagathos. It's a way of saying a decent human being, a moral human being, a gentleman, whatever. Someone who's cultivated, educated, and does the right thing, right? And she's employing this as the contrary of someone who's ignorant and refuses to learn, right? So it's an appropriation of what human excellence is. It's because someone who isn't beautiful and good or sensible is of the opinion that this is enough for him, right? One who doesn't think he's needy surely doesn't desire what he doesn't think he needs. Now, unfortunately, our entire educational system is devoted to making people think that they do not need anything in the fundamental area of human life, which is what should you do to be excellent and noble. We don't teach that because we think that that's tyranny to teach that. And so willy-nilly, of course, people would just pick up what's around them, and in that way, some thin strands of human cultivation have remained. They're being rapidly dug up by the anti-human cultivation industry that we have in process. But that's a key statement for Plato, which is that what is most difficult is self-satisfaction with your own thoughts about the ends of life. And that's a perennial thing. Now, it's complicated because what makes people actually noble and good, or beautiful and good, can be their attachment to their convictions. People don't act out of out of recognition that things are infinitely complex and ambiguous. You don't get great actors out of that. It's the beginning of all thought, but not action. There's a tension between theory and practice. Okay. Now he says, then who, Diotima, are those who engage in philosophy if they're neither the wise nor the ignorant? And she responds, by now, she said, this should be plain even to a child. She treats him a little bit the way Socrates treats Strepsiades in Aristophanes' Clouds. They're the ones between the two, and love, eros, would also be among them. So her answer is, philosophers are among those who are in between ignorance and wisdom, and eros would be in between ignorance and wisdom. Justification, for means because. It's just an old-fashioned word because people have no idea how to translate this Greek conjunction that goes at the beginning of sentences, because we don't begin sentences with the word because. Because wisdom is certainly one of the most beautiful things or noble things, and eros is eros of the beautiful. Isn't that an odd expression? Eros is eros of the beautiful. Love is love of the beautiful. Now, when she discussed right opinion before, she discussed it as hitting on the truth, but not being able to give an account. Wherever that was, can't find it. And that's what it means to be in between, to be in touch with the truth, but not be able to but not to have grasped it fully. Right? So it's not being in between and being out of touch with the extremes, it's comprehending in some way the extremes. Okay. Now, she asserts here at 204C that it's not surprising that she thought that he, and therefore Agathon and the many, as Socrates has inserted, thought that love is beautiful as opposed to being love of the beautiful. She says at 40C1, but there's nothing surprising in what you thought love or eros was. I thought, judging from what you say, that you believe that love was what is loved, not what loves. For this reason, I think, love kept appearing to you to be all beautiful or all noble. Yeah, so the desire gets turned into a thing, and the thing is made like its object, the beautiful. Indeed, what's lovable is in its very being beautiful and delicate and complete and most blessed. So that's the object of love. But that which loves is something that has another sort of look, the sort I just went through. The word look is ideia or idea. Right? The sort I just went through. Now, how did she go through that? By giving the genesis. She uses the word genesis when she says, what's the cause of these things? What's the cause of the attributes of eros? She says the cause of these things for him is his genesis. So there's two kinds of account here mixed up. The genetic account, these children come from this parent and therefore they have these qualities, right? Or these people have these qualities because they have this language and this history and so on. Those are genetic accounts of human behavior, radically deficient and defective. Right? An eidetic account looks at the quality in itself. Okay? Now, it's difficult to do that with eros because you're looking at a kind of openness to things that doesn't itself have a stable look. Okay, and that's when Socrates pipes up and says, well, given that, what use does eros have? And then we're going to have to read this next page because it's very helpful for understanding the speech as a whole, because he's going to redraw the boundaries between the beautiful and the good. So when Agathon spoke, Socrates said, so you say that eros is beautiful and is love of the beautiful. And he has to admit that he does think that. And Socrates said, when he sort of showed him that what he really meant was that eros is of the beautiful and therefore lacks the beautiful, he says, do you call all good things beautiful as well? So in that case, everything is beautiful or noble, but some of them are good. But everything, that's the comprehensive, is the beautiful or the noble. What's going to happen in summary in the next page is that Socrates is going to say, all human beings desire what's good. Now, for some reason, we don't call people who want what's good lovers. Love, or eros, has something to do with the beautiful. The beautiful, therefore, in the first sense, you might say, is a subset of everything good that everyone wants, but that's not quite right. It's more like an appearance of part of the good things. But just to make it extremely simplistic, and this is wrong and has to be qualified, but just to make it very simple, for Agathon, everything is beautiful and some of those beautiful things are good. For Diotima, everything is good that people desire, but some of them are beautiful. And there's a difference between the utilitarian desire for fitness and medicine and so on, and the activity that we recognize in a lover, which necessarily has a relation to the beautiful as opposed to just the good. And how this might work out will come, but just to see that reversal initially. Okay, so she says at 204D, that's just what I'll try to teach you next. Right. Now, love is this sort of thing and has this manner of birth, right, Genesis, and is, as you claim, of beautiful things. But if someone should ask, in what respect is love of beautiful things? Socrates and Diotima, more plainly, in what respect? Why would you translate that? If someone were to ask, you could just say why. Why is Eros of the beautiful things? Yeah. I mean, yes, strictly speaking, it's an accusative of respect, but to say in respect to what? Why? Why is there a love of beautiful things? Right, that's the fundamental question. Like, what's the motive? More plainly put, the one who loves beautiful things loves, what does he love? Okay, that's a possible translation. The one who is in love loves beautiful things. What does he love? Okay, fine. That is, what do you actually want, right? If you're in love with, and you have to keep in mind all the time that this word can mean beautiful or noble. Okay. Now, Socrates' reply is that they become his, one's own. And there's going to be a further discussion of the difference between, the good or the beautiful on the one hand and what is one's own. Okay. She says, but the answer, she said, still yearns for some question like this. Now, answers don't yearn, right?
Yes, they do. Way hot.
But human beings yearn, right? And they can yearn for something further when they're given an inadequate answer. Yes?
They can.
This is throwing a spanner in the works, but what if the object of what we yearn for is the truth, and the truth is ultimately personal in its ontology?
Please tell me how it's personal. Just what you mean.
What I mean is that, say, the truth ultimately is God, and God is defined by a personal nature or mind or something like that.
Yes.
That's just the first example that I thought of.
Yeah. Okay. So let's take that example then. Yeah. Is God changing?
Well, we could get down a rabbit hole here. I mean, no, but in another sense, our capacity for changeability derives, at least in one tradition, from our bearing the image of God. So to say that he is personal is to say that he has some of the qualities that we have, the capacity to yearn, but it must in some sense be analogized to a form of being which is unchanging.
Wouldn't our yearning be the fact that we are not divine?
Sorry, repeat that?
We're not God, or a God, and that's why, and it's our defectiveness that makes us yearn.
Not if...
And it depends what kind of God. Okay,
sure.
Zeus. Like Zeus can yearn because Zeus has this... Zeus has recognizably human appetites in addition to being immortal.
Yes.
Whether or not that's coherent is another question.
Yeah, so Zeus's desires are going to be based on a lack, whereas in the Christian tradition, God's desires are not based in a lack. They are a function of his gratuitous love, which stems not from any need of his externally or internally, but as a sheer act of self-giving. So it's a different kind of
so it's not a yearning or a lack.
Yeah, so yearning semantically might be not quite the right term, but you know what I mean. It's still a form of love, a self-giving sort of love. So it's yearning for something, but not in the same sort of romantic sense where we lack something else. That was just a thought that came
Yeah,
to mind.
no, that's interesting.
I had a much more banal idea that, just that a question can have a certain inner logic which leans towards a particular answer, which is, why we have to have these discussions in dialogue.
But only because someone sees that, yes?
Okay. But why isn't it a yearning then?
Sorry?
Why isn't it a yearning?
It's not a yearning of the question, it's of someone who comprehends the question and the answer.
Yeah.
Someone who understands the answer.
Okay, yeah, so we need to fill it out with a person.
Yeah. It's not alive.
Yeah.
Just an odd locution, but but those are two helpful possibilities. Okay, so people who love the beautiful, whatever the beautiful is, a beautiful human being, beautiful noble acts, right? Still, okay. So what do you have when you have the beautiful? And the way Diotima puts this at 204D is, what will happen to that one to whom beautiful things come? That is, if your wish comes true and you possess the beautiful. Socrates says, I declared that at the moment I wasn't able to give a ready answer to this question. And Diotima says, but suppose someone changed the terms and using good instead of beautiful should ask, come, Socrates, the one who loves good things loves what? So again, that they become his. Same answer he gave for the beautiful. And what will happen to the person to whom good things come? That one, I've got the resources to answer. Socrates said, he'll be happy. Right. So, okay, so we just need to, we can agree or disagree, and I'd be interested in any disagreements. He is saying, Socrates is saying, the desire for good things is intelligible, right? And that all desires for good things lead up to the desire for happiness. And that's followed by the following point. So it's by the possession of good things that the happy are happy. If you have what is genuinely good, you're genuinely happy, she said. And there's no further need, no further yearning, right? So any other acquisition of goods or beautiful things leads to further yearning, right? Okay, there's no further need to ask, for the sake of what or why does he who wants to be happy want it? The answer seems to be final, right? So if you say someone's perfectly happy, they're not saying, if only I had $1,000 more, happiness is complete. Right? Happiness has conditions. Maybe you need $1,000 as the condition, but happiness is complete. Okay? Now, this is one of the massive differences between modern and ancient thought. That there's such a thing as human completion or happiness, and that all striving circles more or less incoherently and intelligently around that. Right? Now, I just thought I'd give you a very quick example of the modern alternative. If I can, where is it? Okay, are you looking at chapter 11 of the difference of manners?
Yeah.
So this is Hobbes' Leviathan. Now, as he points out, so on the difference of manners, by which he means character, the difference in morals, manners, character, and therefore the difference in our relation towards our ends. Now, and he points that out in the first sentence. I don't mean points of small morals like not picking your teeth. This is Hobbes' example. But the qualities that lead to happiness. Now, he says here, to which end we are to consider that the felicity, the happiness of this life, consisteth not in the repose of a mind satisfied. Now, so far, total and perfect agreement with Plato. If the spine of the psyche is eros, and eros is the philosophical frame of mind in relation to the truth, then there's no satisfaction, right? There's temporary participation in the principles of things, which that's not satisfaction. Now we come to a complete disagreement in the next sentence. For there is no such finis ultimus, utmost aim, nor summum bonum, greatest good, as is spoken of in the books of the old moral philosophers. He's thinking particularly of Aristotle, but the point applies to Plato equally. There is no good for human beings qua human beings. Now, there are goods qua animal. That is, just like cats, we need food and water and shelter, right? There's no human good. So if you look at this second paragraph, so that he says, so that I put in the first place, Plato and Aristotle put the human good, happiness or excellence in the first place. Hobbes, for all of modernity, writes this: in the first place, I put for a general inclination of all mankind a perpetual and restless desire of power. Power after power. Why? Because power is instrumental, but there's nothing that it's instrumental for, so you must always seek more power. That ceases only in death. And the cause of this is not always that a man hopes for a more intensive delight than he has already attained to, or that he cannot be content with a moderate power, but because he cannot assure the power and the means to live well which he hath present without the acquisition of more. From hence it is that kings, whose power is the greatest, turn their endeavours to the assuring it at home by laws, or abroad by wars, and when that is done, there succeedeth a new desire, in some of fame from new conquest, in others of ease and sensual pleasures, in others of admiration, or being flattered for excellence in some art or other ability of the mind. So the complete reverse of Plato and Aristotle. So in the first place for Plato and Aristotle is the ability of the mind. That's the first, because we're human beings who are characterized by the fact that we have an intellect. So the highest attribute we have is our highest hope for happiness. The fulfillment of the mind is human happiness. And then we can go down. Now, and below that, there's a desire for fame, because that forces you to transcend yourself and to be admired for example, justice, in order that your name live forever, and you found a city, or so on. Or you write poems that have gods in them, and those gods become the principles of a people, and so on and so forth. And then further down would be an actual practicing statesman, the king that he refers to. And then further down would be someone who just lives a moderate life. And then further below that would be the hedonist. And then last of all would be someone who just wants power. That's the lowest. So if you turn that around, you get modern thought, right? Now, there are some minor qualifications with German idealism, which are not really that important. I can explain that if you want to discuss, but this is the fundament, right? And this thought has permeated throughout, because it leads to several beneficial possibilities. One is, okay, if everyone desires power, then doesn't that mean we're going to scratch all of each other's eyes out in order to be able to steal each other's acorns? No, not if Hobbes is right, and we can be made to experience the fear of violent death, and he can, if he can attack the idea that it's noble to go to war and so on, then we can become fearful and form a social contract and so on. But power is still at the base of everything. And social contracts and laws are for limiting power. Now, what has actually happened over the last few hundred years is that those basic thoughts have become very persuasive, because it looks like we can make an alliance with all our fearful fellows against nature, for the material conquest of nature, in order to make us live more comfortable, pleasant, and longer lives. And that's had some success. Of course, the same science that did that invented other things that are harmful. But yeah. But what that means is that it undermines the possibility of human cultivation. And that's why everyone in Western countries currently rejects their own culture. I mean, and that's what's taught at the universities and so on and so forth. But so I just point that out because it's the strict contrast, and you can see it's just the reversal of the classics, and therefore we all need to understand what we think of that reversal, and whether or not we want to get a rope and try and pull the baby back from the bathwater. Okay.
Martin,
Yeah.
is there anything to be said about the approach that seems to be taken, at least here, where I'm not sure if I'm missing anything, but we're dealing with, future, and we're dealing with perfect tenses in respect of subject matter, which seems to come across as tangible and finite. Once you get beauty or once you get good, then you're happy. Isn't it? Is there something to be said that, in fact, we're not dealing with so much perfect and future, but really participle? It's not whether I have or will have or don't have. It's just the mere I am having. And what we're having is, in fact, limitless. There's no such, beauty can go on forever. Power can be over everything. Good. These are all things that really don't have an end, or it's in the sense that they're infinite. That you can keep on loving and loving and loving and loving, and the more you love, it's not this, if it's a resource that runs out. The more you love, the more you give, the more you have.
Yeah.
In one
Okay. So
respect.
the argument here, though, is that that the way you've articulated is exactly right. For example, for power, yes, or
Sure.
for fame, but that but it's different for human fulfillment. That there is a human, and I'm not saying that's true. I happen to think it is true, but that's the argument, that those other things might contribute to human happiness, but they're not human happiness precisely because they are infinite. Does that?
Yeah, I think that's one aspect of it. It's not so much. It's not so much getting across the text here. It's just more of a more just applying what it is that they're saying, and trying to come up with a resolution in terms of how they're speaking, and just this, we don't have it, so we get it, and then we move on. Whereas it's not so much that if we don't or do have it, it's just that mere fact of that being in that moment of the quest of seeking it, and that is just perpetual, and then that's what gives rise to happiness. So
Well,
it's just
it's definitely not something like, that's why I tried to insist that Plato and Aristotle, it's more clear in Plato than in Aristotle, agree with this first sentence, that the felicity of this life consisteth not in the repose of a mind satisfied. So for the classics in general, that's true, that we have certain finite human potentialities that are fulfilled in action, and including the action, in fact, primarily the action of the mind. And you can't, like, you've only got one, like, if you make a comparison with the health of the body, you've only got one body, right? There's only so much. You can train for about 20 hours. If you train hard enough, you can't train more. Unless you're doing swimming, you can train for 8 hours a day. But if you train for most things, like running, boxing, you can train for about 20 hours at your peak a week, right? And any more than that, you'll break your body down.
Yeah, but then someone just decides to do the 43-mile marathon.
Yeah, but they're still running no more than about 180k a week. If you run more than that, you're going to break your ability to run a marathon down. So there's a finite peak of human achievement in athletics and in human health in general. Everyone knows that. A certain amount of vegetable, a certain amount of meat, and you don't get more healthy by eating a whole cow a day. Like, there's a certain amount that will lead you to the peak health possible for you, or that would lead someone to their peak fitness. It's like 22 hours. It varies with different people. It might be 22 hours for one person, 30 for another. But if you do 50 hours, you're going to get less fit because you'll be more tired, and you'll break down, and you will have injuries and so on. So there is a peak that you can reach, and it's a genuine good. Like health and physical fitness are genuine goods, and they like, it's not a matter of opinion. If someone says, "Look, my truth is that never running and occasionally doing some yoga is the peak of human fitness," I'm afraid that's just not true.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Thank you.
I just couldn't think of another example. I know. Does that make sense, Steve? Or
No, it does. Thank you. No, that's I'm still working on it, but that's been very helpful. Very helpful. Thank you.
yeah. So I mean, obviously these are large questions, and I can't resolve them. But I find those kinds of examples persuasive. That there's certainly by nature there's a certain degree of health that is better than a certain degree of sickness. That's just, everyone will admit that. But then when you change the subject and say, well, what do you think about human excellence? Well, that's just culturally relative, blah, blah, blah. I think that's obviously nonsense. You immediately recognize people when you meet them, you talk to them, you get to know them, that they're in psychologically better state than other people, right? And it might be people who are use completely different languages, have a completely different background, but within those different media, they're in a better state than others, or a worse state. I think that's a part of our experience. People like to deny it because they don't want to be tyrannical. They don't want to say, this is good, that's bad, you must do what's good. Everyone must get up every morning and read 500 lines of Homer in Greek. Now, we would all be better off if we all did a 5K run, 100 push-ups, and 500 lines of Homer every morning. Our society would be infinitely better off. But I don't think we should necessarily impose those as laws. And also, even if we're going to say, no, you can do whatever you like, just stay on TikTok. Even if we're going to do that, we still need to have an understanding of human nature before we make those laws. Okay. Sorry, I got a bit off track there. Did you?
This is a different track. But yeah, no, it seems to me highly relevant that Socrates says that he has the resources to answer the question about the good.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, obviously that's about love's dad. And yeah, can you fill that out for me? And also, why can't he answer the question about the beautiful? And why is that so hard?
So what does Romeo have if Juliet loves him in turn?
I mean, he gets to look at her forever.
He gets to look at her forever. Okay, keep that in mind. That's going to become immediately relevant in the next page.
Okay.
All right? Okay, now for the first question. Yeah, so he says, I've got the resources to answer. So she's defined philosophy as eros, which is therefore something that participates in both resourcelessness, aporia, and poros, resource. Now, philosophy must insist that you already have some contact with the truth. Otherwise, any attempt to persuade you to participate in the activity of philosophy would be just some arbitrary construction. Participate in this cultural activity, which some people do and others don't. There's no sense to that. There's got to be that you have some contact with the truth that philosophy aims at. And that's part of when the eros is in between and binds together both the ignorance and the wisdom. So the wisdom is that which you already know. So what is it that you already know? It is that you would like to be happy.
Yeah.
Right. So the beginning point of philosophy is that you genuinely think that you would like to be happy. Now, in the Republic, you can refuse this. Like now that's the most popular view, which is that there is no such thing as happiness, and to say that there is tyranny, blah, blah, blah.
Oh,
now,
I mean, we've got happiness studies for that.
Yeah, but we only study the conditions for happiness. Welfare studies, happiness studies, they're all studying the conditions for happiness, not happiness, because there's no such thing, right? Whereas in the Platonic universe, there are some people who are willing to say that, like Plato in the Republic insists that there's no true distinction between what's better and what's worse. Right? Then he's made the four silent for the whole dialogue. And the implication is that if you say there's nothing that's better or worse, then you have no grounds for saying that's a good argument, that's a bad argument, etc., etc. But his silent presence is pointed. It means that we cannot refute someone who just doesn't think this, doesn't think that they want to be happy, or insists they don't. That's true. There's a guy called Richard Rorty, he's a moron from a previous generation. He wrote moronic books and articles and was very famous amongst some people. And
A moron?
He once, sorry?
A moron? That's pretty strong.
Okay, there was an intellectually incompetent guy called Richard Rorty. He got tenure, so he must be very, very smart, at least in one respect. And he was walking down the stairs at Balliol Library at Oxford, and Stanley Rosen was going up the stairs, and Rosen said, "How are you doing?" politely, and Rorty said, they're both carrying 45 books. He said, I don't think we'll ever understand the truth, or something like this. And Rosen told me this anecdote, I assume in order to indicate that what you can see in Rorty's writing, which is that, it's all too hard, therefore there is no truth and there is no good. And one of his articles was about, one of the very few articles I wasted my time on reading was about why we can't persuade Hitler that it's not good to kill people, or something stupid like that, as if persuading Hitler is the criterion for the truth. It's like persuading Plato in the Republic. There are some people that aren't persuadable. Now, you may not be persuaded by Plato, and that's completely fair enough, because you'll have your reasons and you can think through it, unlike Hitler. We don't have to convince Hitler, right? We have to kill Hitler and then carry on. We've lost all of that strength of mind. You just have to kill Hitler. I walked past the Hitler Youth at the university the other day.
Seriously?
Well, all those tents and they have the same thoughts as the Hitler Youth. They have different uniforms and different flags. But we've lost the strength of mind to deal with these things properly. Okay, got off track again. Where are we? How did we get on to Richard Rorty, for God's sake?
Bravo.
Okay, but this is I keep blurring this fundamental point by going off track, but this is really fundamental, that he says he's got the resources to answer, because even he who's in a position of ignorance, and as he says, I've come to you because I'm trying to learn, right? So he's got an awareness of ignorance, which is what he said was the most difficult thing to overcome, is to lack that awareness that you actually lack knowledge, right? But he has that awareness. So he's being philosophical in going to her and asking questions. And his questions actually point up they develop the argument substantially. So this point here, I think it is fundamental for Plato and Aristotle. They take it that most human beings, most of the time, can be persuaded to say, they desire various things, good things, beautiful, noble, pleasant, profitable, but ultimately they want to be happy. They can be made to admit that, and that's basic. Now, if that's wrong, and there are many arguments against it, if that's wrong, then there is a real problem with the classical philosophical enterprise. But I take it this suggestion is basic, and the rest of the argument develops from here, because she's immediately going to say that, let's go to that question. So at 205a, and this want and this love, do you think they're common to all humans and everyone? All want good things to be theirs always. And Socrates says just that, it's common to all. That's what's common to all human beings. So the whole variety of ways of life and so on are different expressions of the same desire for human happiness. Right? And she says, why then, Socrates, if all in fact love the same things and always, why don't we say that all people love rather than saying that some love and others don't? It's stronger if I'll just paraphrase that slightly differently. Okay, if everyone is in love with the same things, the good things, because they want to be happy, then why do we call some people lovers, and why don't we call bakers, bankers, and aircraft manufacturers lovers? Right? If the eros is the same, why are some people erotic and others not? So, and what she's going to develop is that there's a love of beauty or nobility that separates the lovers, the specific group of lovers from everyone else and everyone else's eros for what's good. And what that difference is ultimately going to be the lovers of the beautiful or the noble want to be immortal. They're human and they're not mortal, they're not immortal. And so there are various ways in which their desire is sublimated in their love for another person, in their love for producing works of such beauty that their name becomes immortal, and possibly ultimately in their love of intellectual ends. This is her suggestion. But so that the missing key is the experience of the mortal being wanting to be immortal. Now, and I'm going to make this suggestion that underlies, I think, something in the following few pages, and you can reject it, but we can argue about it. But I think what she's suggesting is that in the experience of love, which is the experience of finding something or someone beautiful or noble, there is an awareness of one's own mortality. And that's why love and death are so often twined in literature, because there is this connection. There's a sense of one's own partiality and awareness of one's finitude in that experience. Okay, so but we'll come to that in more detail. Now, she says, well, don't wonder. Now, this is one of at least twice, from it might even be 3 times, that she says to Socrates, don't wonder, which is, whenever you see the word wonder in Plato, you can think to the Theaetetus, where Socrates says, wonder is the beginning of all philosophy. So it's a curious point. She says, okay, so, and, she says, having separated off a certain form, eidos, of love, we call it love, imposing on it the name of the whole. So the whole is the desire for good things in order to be happy. We take off a certain portion and give it the form love, eros. And there are other cases in which we make a similar use of words. And he says, for example, such as, and she says, such as this. Now, this is the 3rd time that we've had a paradigm or an example. And each of the paradigms is meant to show the whole. It's meant to show something vital for the whole argument. It's not just some random example, right? As we'll see immediately in this. Okay, you know that making, poiesis, poetry, right? So, and she's going to be explaining the following point. Poiesis, or poetry or making, has a whole, which is the generation of anything, and it has precise meaning, which is the putting into words into quantity, meter, rhyme, rhythm, and putting speech into that form, speech that ultimately forms a people, right, on the highest level. But okay, so she says, you know that making is something manifold, since as you see, now, interesting quote, every cause by which anything whatever comes from non-being into being is a making. Now, Heidegger, in the essay Question Concerning Technology, quotes this and says, this is what Plato means, that every cause by which anything whatever goes from not being present to being present is a making. That's because the Greeks think that being is being present, and they understand being present as construction or making. And they base, therefore, their understanding of being on techne, which is completely and utterly false, right? Because the strictest possible contrast is being made here between making and knowing. which comes along at about 210. The whole point is that poiesis, or making, is a constricted, it's one portion of the experience of our response to beauty. Yeah, I just find that very striking. I mean, I'm not criticizing him for being a bad scholar. If you want good scholarship, then you go find someone helpful and boring. He's got his own philosophical project, but I just make that point. And because so many scholars and other people follow Heidegger without going and checking the original. And so there are books and books talking about, the philosophy of presence, or it's made its way through English literature, that to be is to be present, and this is a prejudice that we have from the Greeks, completely false. And it dominates several intellectual disciplines because people don't go back to the original. Okay, sorry, I'm going off track. Okay. But just very simple point.
Can I just challenge that a bit?
Please.
When you say that, I mean, as you know, I started to learn Greek with you last year, but I got distracted by a huge project I was working on. But when you say to go back to the original, I mean, your interpretation, your personally, of Greek words is your interpretation. You're not, as you said last week, there's not any original language. So I find it problematic when you say go back to the original, as if it's a holy grail.
No, but I think you can understand the intention of an author.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm one of those.
Authorial intentionality.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Okay, and as you know, there are other ways of understanding text. So I'm glad you.
I think
put that out.
Yeah. Now, because I first started to try and study English, and the first thing that people tried to convince me was that there's no such thing as authorial intention, and so I knew that everything had gone seriously wrong in recent thought, and that's why part of the reason why I was encouraged to go back. But yeah, I find it very difficult not to do it, because how can you sit down with an intention to write an article saying there's no authorial intention? I find that odd.
Yeah, but okay, just one final point that I'd like you to pick up another time, but I want to put it out there. You have stated, and I agree, that the subject-object paradigm came to the fore in modernity. So if that's the case, aren't we reading a text that is embedded in the subject-object paradigm?
Okay, we're possibly understanding subject-object differently, because, and I think maybe you're seeing it very broadly. Because I have something specific in mind, which is that the object, as the early moderns like Descartes want to make it, is an object of modern natural science. And you can only reach that notion that there's a subject with an object that can be comprehended by mathematics more precisely than by common sense, by going through that process of how he pretends to denigrate the senses and so on, and that mathematical things are more clear to us. And if that's true, then yeah, and so I reject that, because I think that the things of common sense, like our appreciation for people's character, our appreciation of things that are beautiful, I think that those things are more true than our mathematical constructions.
Yeah. Okay. Final thing. I am struggling with the words love, beautiful, noble, good, because they don't, as you, I think, have said, we can't actually get to the kernel of what those things mean.
So, okay, so what I've, how before I was suggesting that Diotima and Socrates, and by inference Plato, are all saying that they want to ground your interest in philosophy in something you can't really deny, like you want to be happy, for example. Now, obviously, there are many people from Hobbes onwards who do deny that. So that's a very popular thought, that there is no such thing as a natural human fulfillment. But they are arguing that there are certain experiences that we can't deny, but that we don't know fully. We can't deny, for example, to use Aristotle's terminology, we can't deny that there are beautiful or noble things or deeds. But we don't know fully what they are. What is beauty itself, or what is nobility itself? Does that make some sense, or?
Yes and no, because it's as if there's an idea and a form in a classical Platonic sense of these things that we cannot grasp through our intellect, but they are there. And I'm really struggling to understand that idea that there are things that exist not as subjects or entities, but that exist in the ether, so to speak.
How do you mean in the ether?
Well, in our intellect, I'm using that word as you've just said it. They're there, but we can't grasp it.
Yeah, but they're definitely not in the intellect in the sense of a Cartesian idea. That's an aspect of self-consciousness, right? So what he's saying is that we recognize in our ordinary existence that that was a noble act and that was an ignoble act.
When you say we recognize, you might recognize that, but if you put somebody else beside you, they may differ. So
yes, they may, but are we then differing that this particular act is, if we, precisely by disagreeing about whether or not this particular act is noble or ignoble, we are definitely agreeing that there is such thing as nobility. And now if the person says, no, there's no such thing, you're imposing your own views on the world, that's a different argument. But I would submit that almost everyone, despite their other predilections, will disagree about the particular case, but agree that there are some things that are beautiful and ugly, noble and ignoble. How would you respond to that?
Well, the problem is that none of us have got this grasp of what these things are. So if I say something is beautiful and you say I disagree with that, but we both agree that there is a sense of being beautiful, I'm not sure where that gets us.
Oh, well, I think we can discuss what the character of beauty is.
Can you?
Yeah, at length.
I mean, you're not saying, Peter, I think that, we can only have a discussion about the beautiful or nobility if we can define these terms in advance.
Well, I'm trying to say, what? I don't like the question what, but these things, whatever it is, I mean, I have a sense of what's beautiful and what's good and what's noble.
Yep.
But just because I have that sense doesn't mean that in and of itself it exists. I'll say it again, in the ether.
Yeah, forget the ether. There's no ether in Plato. Occasionally he makes these remarks that sound ethereal or Neoplatonist, but that's not real, right? What he means is that you think that you've experienced people, actions that are noble. Now that doesn't mean you can define what nobility is in itself. In fact, the discussions we have are coherent only because we have a prior recognition in our experience, rather than that we have it. It wouldn't work that if we had a complete, comprehensive, discursive understanding of something, and then we went around applying. That doesn't work. You have to recognize the thing first before you build the discourse.
Okay, I'm happy to carry on. I mean, I enjoy your courses, so I can't really articulate myself more than what I've already done.
Yeah, no, we can come back and try to make more sense of where we're going as we go. And we should actually quickly have a break. Sorry, I omitted to give everyone some relief. So yeah, if we come back at 5:25.
What tea? I brought.
Okay, so we are, we're still at 205 B to D. It is, I think, worthwhile to go through this page. So Socrates has admitted at 205A that he believes the desire, the eros for good things, is common to all human beings. Then he asks, she says, well, why do we only call some people lovers? And she says, having separated of a certain form, which is an interesting use of the word form. So is this what we always do when we're using the word form? We have a whole. We take a part and use it almost like it's a concept. We give it a name and apply it. Okay, we can come back to that. So we impose on the whole, on a part of the whole, the name for the whole. Okay, now he gives the example of making, right? So everyone who brings something into being is a poietes, a maker or a poet. Right? And then she says, just the same, you know they aren't called poets, that is craftsmen and so on, but have other names, because one portion has been marked off from all of making, the portion that's concerned with music and meters, and is called by the name of the whole, poiesis, poetry. This alone is called poetry, and those who own this portion of making, poets. Okay, so that's our example of where we take a whole, making, and making a poiesis, making poetry, and we call a part by the name of the whole, that is, the people who write verse, right? And this is the decisive example, because he's now going to say, not say, but I think what's implicit is human beings as a whole have a desire for the good. Our main response to the good is actually an experience of the beautiful, or the promise. Was it Stendhal who said that beauty is the promise of immortality? Right. So our experience of beauty is the promise of immortality, and that's that part of eros that we recognize as erotic, the response to beauty. Whereas all of the rest is a response to what's good that doesn't have this experience of beauty, and therefore the promise of immortality, and therefore the experience at some level of one's own mortality. Okay. And yeah, but the primary response is going to be productive. And that's why she's going to say in a second that all human beings are pregnant, right? Because the male and female, so the primary response to our experience of our finitude is productive. That's why she's using the example of poetry. Okay, so at 205D, she says, well then, it's the same regarding love or eros. In sum, all desire for good things and for being happy. So that's the basic desire, and that's the intelligible one, right? Because he has the resources to answer that question. It's intelligible. Is love both exceeding great and all beguiling? So eros, desire for good things and for being happy, is an eros that is deceptive, because she has to explain why, on the one hand, we all desire the intelligible end of happiness, but we never seek it. We are seeking what is beautiful, not what is good. That's what she has to explain. So that's why there's this divergence through the beautiful to get back to the good. Because our experience is that the highest actions that people attain to are for the beautiful or the noble, not for the good. Right? So the businessman wants good things. It's perfectly intelligible. He will make money and be able to have a bigger house and so on. That's good. That's good to have a bigger house. It's intelligible that someone would act like that. But it's, maybe the soldier or the statesman who does the noble thing that we admire, right? Okay, so, and that's an inadequate way of saying it, but we'll get a more adequate way immediately. So I'll just continue. But those who turn to him, now what do they say him? Okay, to it, maybe, I don't know. In many other ways, in money making or in fondness of exercise or in philosophy, aren't said to be in love, and they're not said to be lovers. So money makers, people who love athletics, and people who are philosophers aren't said to be lovers. Right? Now, why would that be? We'll come back. But those who go after him, why him? Okay, anyway, in one certain form and ardently, those who are in love, right, in another way, in a different form, they're the ones who have the whole name love and are said to be in love and to be lovers. And Socrates says it's probable that what you're saying is true. Okay, so let's look at, temporary suggestion for what follows. So people who love money and people who love exercise, people who love athletics, they love a genuine good. The problem with those, well, there's not a problem, but there are limitations. The limitation of money making is it's always instrumental. It's not a good in itself. Right? Now, people treat it as a good in itself and they make billions and they're not satisfied because they're not making money. What they're doing is, what they want is the fame of making that much money or the power or whatever it is. You can only travel in so many yachts at once. It's no longer the yachts at a certain level. I suggest, but because money is an instrument and it's an instrument, of your life, right? It's not something that transcends your life in any way, like the love of beauty, the way the love of beauty of a poet does. The same with the love of exercise, right? Now, philosophy is interesting because that's put here too. It's an intelligible love of something good that you have during your life, and that's it. That's what she's saying here. Okay, now, right, and she says, by contrast, there are people who are in love who we call lovers. And that's the part of the whole that's paradigmatic for the rest. Okay, and she says, a certain account is given according to which those who seek their half are in love. So Aristophanes, right? So here Socrates is putting in the mouth of Diotima a reference to Aristophanes. And he has Diotima say, while my account declares that love is about neither half nor whole, unless, my comrade, it happened to be somehow good. Right. So the good, not the half or the whole. Now, which is a long way to go, right? Because now he's saying that it's not oneself. Right, so the good for oneself is being suppressed. And he gives this example. Since human beings are willing to have their feet as well as hands cut off if their own seem to them to be worthless. Okay, so that's meant to be a proof that we desire only the good. But we desire to cut off this diseased hand because this diseased hand will kill the rest of me if I don't cut it off. Right, so it's still a love of one's own that leads you to cut off your diseased hand. It's not an abstract love of the good. It's of the good for oneself. As she said before, what do you love? The good to be one's own. You always love it to be your own. That's being somewhat abstracted from. Now, this is the next comment. For I don't think each of us cherishes what is his own, unless someone calls what is his own and what belongs to him the good, and what is alien to him the bad, since there's nothing humans love other than the good, or do you think they do? And he says, by Zeus. So he couldn't be more emphatic, I certainly don't. Now, what's odd is that almost all human beings, and definitely all societies ever, identify what is their own with the good. So they do precisely the opposite of what Diotima is saying. Every single society says the law is justice. Not our law as a more or less accurate reflection. I mean, if you're lucky enough to be born in a country that is in the tradition of English common law, then that's about as close as humanly possible as you can get to this philosophical notion that human beings love the good even more than their own, because judges can set precedents, new precedents, based upon the notion that justice is not identical with the law as it's been conducted, been interpreted previously. But you still have to say the law is what's just, and you're being tried and convicted or let off under the law. So all political communities identify what is one's own with the good. So this is what I mean by, in this paragraph, she's abstracting from one's own as if we just aspire to the good. Yeah, did you?
Just in the English, where it says, that unless someone calls, like, what is this someone? Because is this about you need a recognition from somebody else that good is your good, or is it just you're recognizing it of yourself?
Well, she did start by saying a certain account. Like someone gives a logos an account, and that's Aristophanes. So maybe Aristophanes could say that could be Aristophanes further replying, but what is one's own is the good. That's one possibility, or it could be more towards what you're saying, which is that she's spontaneously created a small dialogue in which someone is objecting, and you know how Socrates always does this. Someone might say, that what is one's own is the good. I'm not sure if I see any more particular identification than that. Do you?
Well, no, I thought it was something to do with the way that so you cut off your own hand if you think that it's worthless, but if somebody else thinks it's good for you, then that's part of the construction of it's being a good. Like it just, there is a sort of social reciprocity to understanding these goods. No, too Hegelian.
You mean within the single person, himself or herself?
Yeah.
If I think this is good, then it's helpful, then it's good?
Yeah.
Or that contributes to its worth?
Yes.
So if they do call it their own, then it does become good for them.
Yes. You have to see these things as your own for them to be good for you.
Yeah, that makes a kind of sense. Okay, but what about your diseased hand?
Yeah.
Does it help there? Because then if you think it's good, you're deluded and you'll die. I'm not denying.
Yeah, but if a doctor comes along and says, I can save it, then he thinks it's good, so he's...
Yeah, but say it can't be saved.
Contributing to your sense that it's good.
But what I take from your point, though, is that your point about the doctor is that if someone can save it, you would save it.
Yeah.
Even if it's in an inferior condition. Because it's yours.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's what I think that's an agreement with what I'm suggesting, that where this paragraph is eliding something of our love of our own, as if we're all slightly more abstract lovers of what's good. And you know how she said Socrates said at the beginning, pick out the most beautiful things. So we're going to be leaving aside some aspect of the love of our own in our desire for the good.
Got a suggestion here. So I'm trying to make sense of how it is that we can claim as our own things that we are ashamed of or repent of. And here I'm thinking of the Shakespeare line in The Tempest. I've forgotten the character's name, but towards the end they say, this thing of darkness, I acknowledge my own, or something like that.
Prospero, yeah.
Prospero, there we go. I was trying to remember his name.
Caliban.
And yeah, he's talking about Caliban. And
Yes.
so there, in that case, there's a claiming of one's misdeeds as their own. And so I'm wondering, is part of this discussion the idea that grounded in our rational nature, we have an inchoate understanding of the good? And it's through having that understanding of the good, that implicit grasp of the good, that we're able to identify things that don't measure up to that standard, for instance, our misdeeds. And so the idea here is that it's the implicit possession of that standard that is functioning as that by which we are enabled to cut off our hand in order to allow the rest of us to thrive.
I like all of that. I think that makes perfect sense until the very last phrase where you connect it to this passage and the cutting off the hand, because there I'm not sure, because like any kind of person, great, humble, noble, base, might recognize that if I don't cut this hand off, I'm going to die. So I'm not sure if it's the implicit recognition of the standard of the good that leads you to do that, rather than just love of oneself, which is what I suggest it cuts against the sense of the passage, because the passage is saying, no, we love the good, not one's own. Whereas if we recognize that anyone would be concerned just by calculation to cut off this rotting hand.
Right. I suppose my question is, what is one's own in this situation? And you might have a fairly base understanding there, where it just amounts to your own personal selfish desires.
Yes.
But you might have a more sophisticated understanding that is perhaps more grounded in that implicit understanding of the good. And so you have more sophisticated understandings of the good that allow you to simultaneously acknowledge, say, the wrongs that have been done in your society's history, whilst also maintaining the value of the core of that society's values, or something like that.
Yes, so that's where I think that's a good articulation of what I think is the lesson from both Plato and Aristotle, that there are, for example, there's a principle of justice that our law partially meets, but that our inchoate recognition of that standard occasionally illuminates our situation such that we can recognize that a legal thing that we have done for a long time is actually unjust, and that's why we changed the law to make it more just.
So that's what I was trying to interpret the phrase one's own in that respect.
Yes. So one's own is simply one's own, which could be just bodily, but also one's own beliefs and laws and customs. That's essential to what everyone is. And you can have three different attitudes to that. One is, it's perfectly adequate. This is my way. There might be other ways, and I could have a variety of different responses to other ways: contempt, hatred, indifference. But there's no dialogue or anything. It's just my way and your way. Right? Or there can be, I have this way, but I recognize a standard outside my way and outside your way that allows me to correct my way.
Yes, yes. I think that's what I'm getting at. There's your way, but then there's also this deeper standard that's grounded in you that allows you to critique yourself.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's okay. Well,
that's the argument that is being made by Plato and Aristotle, that there are these principles or standards by nature. So while there's a human being who thinks, it's accessible in some way that allows us to correct what is our own way.
Which is fairly strange, really, if you think about it. Where does that come from? Anyway, that's a completely different train of thought.
But in the same way that there is a standard of health, right? There is genuinely a difference between healthy and unhealthy. You can't deny it. Now, the thing is, when you have a time like ours where the notion of any standard is under attack constantly and has been dismissed for generations, then what happens? You get people who are cutting off body parts.
Yes.
Like there's people who have legs cut off because they identify as someone who doesn't have legs. That's happened, like multiple times across the Western world. Now, that means that they do not have a notion of the nature of what physical health is that's in any way accurate, right? It's an unhealthy notion of what they should be.
Mm-hmm.
So you can deny that there's such a thing as healthy and unhealthy, right? But I think it does indicate a kind of sickness, in my view. But it also indicates the difficulty we're in, because the denial of standards has led to that misapprehension, I suggest.
Yeah, well,
No one's making a good case of standards.
yeah, I mean, when I said it's strange that we have that internal standard, what I was really alluding to there in some way is that it does come from outside ourselves. And there, I suppose I'm pointing or thinking of the Judeo-Christian tradition where the God's standard is implanted in our conscience in some sense. Saint John Henry Newman said that conscience is the aboriginal vicar of Christ in the soul, which means that there is this alternative standard that can differ from our expressed and articulated standard that we claim day to day to believe in. There is a deeper standard that paradoxically doesn't come from us, according to this tradition, it comes from God, but nevertheless is in some sense more essential to our nature and our dignity and our value. I think in somewhat of a Platonic sense, because Plato, at least as I understand it, holds that to do evil is worse than to suffer evil, because to do evil, you're violating the standard that exists internally, and it is in some sense more deeply connected to your own dignity as a human being than any other standards you might have culturally inherited that you claim to live by.
There are points of connection and points of difference.
Right.
The chief one is the word nature.
Right.
So that it's co-evil with human nature that there are such standards. And that's not very far from the picture that you draw. If we went to the Gorgias, where Socrates argues that it's better to be done an injustice than to do justice, that's very much a dialectical argument, and he forces several people to admit that. And it's not something he straightforwardly says. It's really worth reading that in context.
Right, okay, interesting.
Now, he himself only fought in defensive battles, but when he was about 68 or 9, he says, typically for tyrants, tyrants try to blacken your hands in order that you then become an advocate of the regime. Because if the regime changes, you're in trouble, right? This is what tyrants have always done this. And so they told Socrates and 4 other people, when the 30 tyrants were in charge of Athens in 204 BC, to go and get this guy called Leon from the island Salamis, which is part of Attica, and bring him back to have an unfair trial and be executed. And the other 3 people went off to get Leon or Salamis and brought him back. And Socrates said, I went home. And the regime changed within a week or something. So I was saved. Right? So there he does refuse to do something unjust that could have led to his death. So there are, so maybe that is simply his standard. But I think there are complications. But in the same way, he definitely thinks that there are principles external to our will, to our customs, and so on. That's true. The good is higher than the just, though. We get to the Republic. Okay. Sorry, it's 5:58.
Alan's got a question.
And, sorry, I can't see let me just, sorry, Alan.
I don't know how relevant this is, but just apropos of the discussion that was going on earlier, can I just quote something from the Bible, from Deuteronomy? For this commandment that I'm commanding you today is not too wonderful for you, nor too remote. It is not in the heaven that you need to say, who will go up to heaven for us and fetch it for us, that we may hear it, that we may hear it and do it. Neither is it across the sea that you need to say, who will cross the sea for us and fetch it for us, that we may hear it and do it. for the matter is very near you, in your mouth and in your heart to do it.
Now, the difference is, yeah, that's very interesting and helpful. One of the differences between these two modes of there being standards is that in Plato's notion of there being principles, what you read just struck me with this. There's no such thing as a commandment. And we have to interpret this standard to make our own laws or habits or customs. There's no revelation of a commandment, which is a very striking difference. And the status
Yes,
of
yes, I know what you're saying, that here you say there's a direct commandment, but there is implicit, I think, in that statement that you don't have to be commanded to do this because you implicitly know it.
Right. No, very good, Alan. Touche. No, that's very good. Actually, it's funny. One of the and I read this in Leo Strauss before I read it in the original. One of the best examples of what it means to read a dialogue is in the Bible, where what happens? I forget the exact story. Someone is talking to a king and tells the king the following story. There was a man who took care of a ewe, a female sheep, right? Brought it up as if it was his own daughter, and then when someone came to visit the nearby lord, that lord took the sheep and had it sacrificed for the feast. And the king, hearing his story, says that man is radically unjust, or something to that effect. And the person telling the story said, "You are that man," and because he's complaining about some other injustice. But it's this perfect encapsulation of what the dialogue is meant to show you. You're meant to see in this particular figure a paradigm that you exemplify. It's like Hamlet saying the idea of the play is to hold the mirror up to nature.
Yes.
And by nature he means exemplifying a certain character, even though it's in a particular dress and a particular custom and so on. But yeah, sorry, we've gone slightly over time.
And we're obviously not going to get to the end of the
I can't
speech.
believe we haven't got to the end. But
So can we...
yeah, we can have a bit more of a discussion. I'll end the recording and we will pick up next week at around the phase 3, which is 207 to 212, where she discusses the cause of eros. What's the basic motive for eros? And we'll discuss that, and we'll discuss Alcibiades. And you can make your concluding remarks, and I'll speak to you then. So I'll just